Good day, and welcome to our latest webinar in Global Performance Excellence Series, hosted by and created by the Institute of Industrial and Systems Engineers. I'm joined today with Jared Frederici and Jim Dobson, both members of the Poirier Group, and I'm looking forward to working with them today and sharing our thoughts on business process management 4.0 and 5.0. We're going to give you some perspectives and points of view around what that is and how it's evolved over time and where it's headed. And then Jared's going to walk you through a roadmap, so to speak, of how organizations can accelerate the progress from process maturity level 1 all the way up to 5. So we've got a lot to cover today. This webinar today builds on two webinars that we did on the 19th and 27th of September. This is the cover slide from the session that we did on the 27th. The focus of both of these webinars, in fact, this three-part series, has been on updating and enhancing our views and on how organizations can manage through periods of disruption. So we did this series of webinars back in the spring of 2020, and that was as you know, at the front end of the pandemic. And now we're facing a number of additional disruptions that are challenging organizations, continuing to challenge organizations. And so this series is intended to help people think about, reflect on, get a little bit of altitude and perspective on how industrial and systems engineers can contribute to helping organizations survive and thrive in periods of disruption. So administratively or housekeeping wise, first of all, thank you for taking time to join us. We'll share how to get access to the recording. In fact, Farouk has shared the IISE link. And if you want to see a blog on this webinar and see a YouTube version, you can go to the Poirier Group YouTube channel and get access to those. So there's three different sort of formats we've got this in for you. We'll field questions as appropriate and time permits. Please use the chats function to share your comments. Follow-up questions are welcome, and I'll provide contact information for our speakers for you at the end. And for those of you that value certificates, IISE will be mailing those out the week after the webinar. So just a bit of background. As I mentioned, we did a series of webinars back in that were very popular. We had I think close to 1,000 people attend these webinars back in April of 2020, and they focused obviously on helping people think through how they were going to manage through the pandemic, and that's been a challenging period for us. And then in 2020 and 2021, post that series of webinars that we did in the first half of 2020, we've had another 40-something webinars on a wide range of topics, all related to organizational performance excellence. And as I mentioned, back starting on the 19th of September, we've updated our views, and we had Jim Tompkins join us on the 19th. And you can get access to those webinars that we did on the 19th and 27th using these links that Farouk has just shared with you. So today we have had a series of webinars that Jared has participated in, dating back to April of 2021. So those webinars are also archived on the IISE website. You can get access to those. And that'll sort of lead you through a build up to the session that we're going to do today. And then we have two sessions that Jared and I will be working on in November and December that I think will be follow on to what we talk about with you today. So again, this is what the library looks like in IISE. You can go to the link and then you'll see these 10 buckets, and you can go into those buckets and you'll see all the webinars listed out in chronological order, the most recent at the top. So this is our storyline for today. It's there's sort of 7 key points, and I'm going to walk you through the first three points, and then Jared's going to take you through the 4. And I'm going to whiz through these first 3 key points. I want to make a comment that there's a lot of slides in here. We're going to zoom through a bunch of them, almost in some cases maybe even skip over some to make sure that we get to the end, to the 7th point. But you'll have access to it, so you can go back. You can go back and you can look at the slides, and if you have questions, you can reach out and ask us. So the whole field of operational excellence, and some of us have lived through more of this timeline than others. Me being one that's lived through more of the timeline. Not 100 years of it, but certainly back to the 70s and 80s when Deming and Jack Welch and others were doing their job. But I just threw this slide in because I think it's interesting to look at the historical evolution of what we call operational and organizational excellence. I don't want to do anything other than just throw it there so you can get a sense of what's been happening. You know, what's happening to us right now in 2022 is that we've got some economic disruptions. We're entering what appears to be a fairly major recession, global as well as North American. And when that happens, there are pressures to sustain profitability. And what we know from the equations back when we went to school is profitability equals price recovery times productivity. And so what happens during recessions is price recovery is a lever that you can't push. So your ability to raise prices at the same rate that costs are going up starts to diminish on you. So even in some cases, price recovery starts to go negative. And so the only course you've got left is productivity improvement. And so the real focus of today is how do we systematically re-engineer, improve on the fly, faster and better our business processes to drive productivity quicker, faster. That's what organizations are going to be challenged with. And so we're focused on the methodology for improving business process and maturity, and also how do you organize organizational excellence initiatives and programs. So one sort of foundational thing, we talked about this in the last session that Jim and David did. This is a simple ABCD model, but what happens is that in periods where productivity becomes a major requirement for success, is that the importance of learning how to improve the rate at which you build the business. You improve what you do and how you do it. Learning how to drive more B into the organization is super, super critical. The default position for most organizations when times get tough is to get rid of industrial engineering, to get rid of anything that's not operations related. We had a call with the Council on Industrial and Systems Engineers on Monday, and the Deeres and the Disneys and the Boeings and the UPSs were all saying, if you're not in ops, you got a problem. You got a budget problem, right? And so the challenge is, how do we do more with less? How do we make sure that our efforts to reduce firefighting, to reduce the need to cater to crises, to drive doing the dumb out, to drive low value add, non-value add out, and provide more time to do our jobs, to run the business and improve the business. That's the challenge. So that's really what Jim and David and Jim and Jared and I are going to be talking about with you today. A lot of what we're talking about is building on things that we've known. I don't know how long Built to Last and Good to Great's been around, but I don't know, Jim, 15 years probably, I would guess. And you know, the lessons that Jim Collins found in the research he did on what separated great organizations from pretty good organizations is still sound. So I don't think that the fundamental principles of what's ahead of us in the 20s has really changed that much. And so why is this important? Why is paying attention to what the roadmap that Jared's going to go over with you important? Because when you do it, you get this kind of performance results. The chart on the left is from Jim Collins' research, and that's a chart of the visionary companies, what they did with a dollar in comparison to what the pretty good companies did. The chart on the right is an example of a project that we've worked on in Canada. David was an integral part of. I was an integral part of that project. Notice the curve looks very similar to the one on the left, right? And all of that outcome, all of those business outcomes, whether they're measured in terms of stock price levels. So the one on the right went from $6 to $60, right? All because of the work that was done back in the early 90s, laying the foundation for an organization to go from good to great. And that takes insightful leadership. So in the webinar that Jim did on the 19th, he talked a lot about the role of insightful leadership in periods where there are tipping points, where there are disruptions that cause tipping points that require changes in paradigms. So today, what we're really doing is we're I don't know that we're yelling train wreck, but I think that we're providing an opportunity for you to rethink your paradigms about how to do B in the organization. So back in the 15th of March, Jared was joined with Eduardo Toledo who's the VP of Business Excellence for Flex. And they talked a lot about, and so we learned a lot about how Flex has done this, right? So this is an example of an organization that's done an outstanding job and has in fact gone from good to great, and has been very successful over time at building out their B program. I throw these in real quickly. I just wanted to, this is something that Eduardo shared with the group. This is some work that's being done in Europe called the Global Lighthouse Network. So if you're interested, I'd encourage you to do some exploration on this. It's really, really interesting. And it has a lot to do with the business process management 4.0 and 5.0 concepts. That I like this slide in particular because it shows sort of a benchmarking slide. How do people that are agile and great in lighthouse examples outperform the organizations that aren't in terms of agility and sustainability and productivity? Really, really cool slide. And would be the output of the kinds of things, doing the kinds of things that Jared's going to talk with you about. So organizations evolved. A lot of it has to do with technology, the rate at which we can move large quantities of information, data, and facts has had a huge impact. And the ability for us to hyperconnect. That's really what's been a major driver of what's happened. So organizations are different today. And the pandemic sort of shocked us into realization that we can really do business differently. And we learned a lot. All of this is building off of something that this was an article in Harvard, I think it was Sloan Management Review back in 1990. And two guys that weren't even industrial engineers said, hey, the new industrial engineering is going to be the integration of people, strategy, technology, and process. Back in 1990, these guys saw that. And I think they were sociologists. So, you know, and I think that's what we're seeing happen in our field. It really is. We really are becoming the people that organizations go to do a better job of integrating the relationship between people, strategy, process, and technology. I got some slides in here that define what a business process is, that define what are the sort of the components, the parts of the jigsaw puzzle, that talk about why do we do business process management. This is a picture of quality, but BPM, Business Process Management 4.0 and 5.0, Jared, is not just about quality. It's about effectiveness. It's about efficiency. It's about productivity. It's about innovation and learning. It's really about a balanced set of key result areas. So I just threw this slide in because a lot of the focus has been on quality, but we've got the same kind of slides that we could create, the same kind of image we create for effectiveness. How does an organization make sure it's effective? How does it make sure it's efficient? And so industrial engineering, really, business process management and business process improvement is huge. The domain of it is huge. It's really, if you think about the breadth and depth of business process improvement, it really spans from little domaic projects, little Kaizen events, all the way up to enterprise-wide transformation. I'm going to slip through a lot of this. I think that the end game really is driving shareholder value. And one of the things that Jared and Jim and I have done is we thought about enterprise value all the way back to when I started working with Loblaws and when I worked with at MDS. The VP of HR came up to me one day and said, "What's the end game for all this stuff, Scott?" He said, "I like this Lean Sigma stuff. It's really cool, but what's the end game?" And I said, "Well, the end game is grow the number of customer relationships, x-axis, grow the value of those relationships, y-axis, and increase the stickiness of the relationship." So when you multiply those three things together, you get the lifetime value of the customer. So optimize the lifetime value of the customer. And so everything that Jared's going to be sharing with you is about how do I systematically attack the right business processes. So go back to this model, pick the right levers, pick the right business process groups to cause the cube to grow faster than the competition's doing. That's really the end game. That's what this is all about. So the last thing I'm going to say before I pass it up to Jared is that there are different points of view on what 5.0 means. In some cases, 5.0 is all about technology. So it's just more technology. It's more autonomousness. In other cases, people believe that it's customization, or it includes resilient, it's human-centric, it's sustainable, it's a smart society. So I think that we have tended, Jared, maybe to stay focused a little narrowly on the technology aspect, but I just wanted to let the audience know that there is a group of people that see it broader than just the next stage of technology. So I wanted to acknowledge that and throw that out as something that people want to think about. So without further ado, Jared, what I'm going to do is pass this off to you. And Jim, as Jared goes through his roadmap, what I've asked Jim to do, and I'm saying this for the benefit of the audience, is Jim spent 25 years with Disney. He was in charge of the industrial engineering and business planning function at Disney. So I think I'm looking for Jim to sort of be the voice of the business, the voice of the customer. So Jared's sort of the architect and engineer of how we migrate business process improvement, how we architect and engineer that. And then I want Jim to be jumping in and maybe pushing Jared a little bit. I don't understand this. This seems real complex. How would we do this in the real world? Those kinds of questions every once in a while. So that's how we set this up. So Jared, let me come up here and give you slide control. And if you click on the screen, you should have slide control now.
Thanks, Scott. And just want to do a mic check. So you can hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay, great. I don't appear to have control, at least of the slides. But so Scott, you might have to still play that role and move us through the animations. But thanks for that. And just as an intro, been with the organization, the Poirier Group now a little over 10 years, and look after solution architecture, methodologies, a lot of our delivery work and quality. So thanks so much for having me. And we're going to dive right in. So I think to your point earlier, our point of view is that while technology is a big part of 5.0 and is an enabler, I think that it's very difficult to do this in reliance fully upon it. The human dimension is critical and will fail without seamless processes of managing some of the technology enablement that we have. So when we look at this, Bloom's taxonomy in terms of a way to examine the maturity of a system, we're applying that here in a triangular model, bottom up. So when we look at where an organization is at, if we say, what does a 1.0 look like? We're talking about organizations, a lot of times smaller, entrepreneurial, where there might be a spreadsheet or two, files are managed disparately, lots of systems that aren't connected, and there's generally a sense of controlled chaos. So in that type of a situation, there's a separate strategy to move an organization from maybe a 1 to a 2. A 2 is where we begin to get some sense of process flow diagrams. Things are starting to get onto paper. We might see a RACI or R matrix or RASCI or however you say it here and there. And we might have some BI in place to look at what's happening from an outcomes perspective, but we don't necessarily, we're not necessarily measuring process data itself. As we begin to build, continuous improvement teams internally as a competency and maybe digitize some of these process flows and actually start to develop future state and make interventions on current state, we're in that sort of 3 range. As that BPI or internal continuous improvement team begins to actually sustain longer term improvements, create some governance. We've got digital workflows here and there, maybe sporadically placed throughout the organization. We're talking about process failures and doing the best we can based on process data to predict failures. We're in that 4, maturity level 4 index. 5 is really where we've got some digital workflows in place, and there are parts of the organization, especially transactionally, that are fully automated, that are done via scripts, or especially in transactional systems occur without human intervention. And a lot of organizations are in the 3 to 3.5 range, moving into 4. Some are in the 4 to 5 range. When you move into 6, we're talking about autonomous process changes happening based on heuristics and algorithms that are set by humans. Imagine process failures predicted and mitigated automatically without human intervention. And that's really where 6 is. As we look at organizations that have done more than 300 projects, we see about an average of about a 2.4 of this maturity index, which is still fairly low. So the strategies to move throughout these stages in this triangle differ, and they differ based on the organization. So what we're going to focus on today is how do we move from, the 4 to 5 transition? What are some strategies to do that? So I'll pause there, Jim. Anything from your side as we tee up this model?
Yeah, no, just a couple of thoughts, Jared, or maybe interested in your reaction as well as, in terms of why companies don't move up the ladder maybe as much. Why are we more in that 2.5 range? Interested in your thoughts and opinions on that. And certainly have some thoughts on my side as well. And I'm sure we'll get into it more, but certainly one question that I would have if I were sitting on the other side of the screen and talking through that automation is, how do you do that? Is that off-the-shelf software? Is that something you develop in-house, et cetera, as you start to look to or want to get into that 5.0 range or even the 6.0 range? It sounds very scientific and very, it's definitely a stretch, I would assume, for a lot of organizations. So maybe we'll talk about that more as we go. But anyway, from a consumer standpoint, those would probably be my top 2 questions.
I think, Jared, when I was the VP of Business Process Improvement at MDS, and I had to think this through for an organization that had no industrial engineers and hadn't done any of this, one of the things that I would think about from a practitioner perspective is, how do I decide which business processes to tackle first? What's the pecking order? Because I can't do them all at the same time. There's 7 or 8 major business processes in any organization, and then thousands of processes underneath those business processes. So that's a challenge for me, is how do I decide which are the ones that are going to give me the biggest bang for my buck?
Yeah, great question. So I think, Jim, to your second question about the how, the mechanics, the technologies, we're going to focus on that shortly. So we'll get to that piece. The first question you had, and Scott, to some of your question, I think it's a really great question, which is, you've got sometimes pockets of continuous improvement groups. Every organization's a bit different. Sometimes they don't call it that. Sometimes it's in a PMO. Sometimes it's business process improvement. Sometimes it's the industrial engineering group. Sometimes business operations just has that go-to person who made some process maps one day. And so organizations have disparate functions of people that build these out. And they go through cycles every 2 to 3 years of different leadership. It tends to fall into a different place if If there are cuts because we're protecting costs, it often gets moved. It's very difficult because we have legacy assets that exist on some site, and it was great for a year, but it was never sustained. And I think those are a lot of the, so, in fact, we don't see technology as typically the tipping point on failures. We see the lack of leadership sponsorship of where this is placed in the organization. We see the lack of transparency on quick wins and how it matriculates through the organization of, hey, we fixed the process today. Look how cool this is. We see a lot of the human element contribute to the failures of sustainability. Oftentimes, we're also building static. So current state is a snapshot in time. So what happens? So the biggest contributor is what happens when a process changes. So we get all excited, or we hire consultants and we build the process maps, and everybody's like, yep, that's what we do. Got it. And we circle some things that don't work, and we then fix those. We build a racing matrix. We know who does what, and things start chugging along. And then 6 months down the road, somebody figures out a better way to do something. We implement a module in ERP and something changes. And there's no mechanism in place to update the process map, the job description, the RACI, and it falls apart. Not right away, but over time. And all of a sudden, 3 years down the road, we're hiring consultants again to redo our current state. And so that governance mechanism, which is really what level 4 in that maturity index is at, is, it's really as simple as that. Is when a process change happens, what's the trigger point for somebody to even know that that's occurred? So great question, Scott and Jim, and I'll address the second piece as we move into the 4 to 5 transition on the mechanics of how.
Yep.
I think, Scott, what we probably should do is skip through some of these. We just want some, there are different frameworks and tools to move from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3. Oftentimes in 1 to 2, it's just getting things on paper. It's building it digitally. It's sometimes it's not even doing it digitally, getting some manila file folders and putting, little bins in place, creating a little 2-bin Kanban system, and getting, oftentimes in 1 to 2, we can't see the flow, especially in an organization that's transactional or that's not a manufacturing line that you can see, especially back office systems. The flow itself is an email from accounts payable into IT. And where is that? We don't know. It's stuck in somebody's mailbox. So oftentimes it's just getting it down on paper and having it written down somewhere. 2 to 3 is a little bit different, and it's focused a little more on getting some type of a cross-departmental framework and getting the organization out of silos that, because people feel the pain, you often see bottom-up parts of the organization trying to fix it themselves. It's not rocket science building a process map. And so, how do we do this cross-departmentally? And it's easier said than done. And so there's different tools that can support you, different technologies to enable that, different web-based tools. And but I think that as we move into a multi-tier governance framework that incorporates and finds a real home for this, we get stuck into debates on who owns the process. Is it our industrial engineers? Is it our continuous improvement folks? Is it a third-party consulting firm? It's a great question. And, we typically tend to say that, those people that that do the process daily ought to be, who is more qualified to identify a process breakdown or the quality of a given process? Well, it's typically those on the line, right? But in a transactional system, those on the manufacturing line are those clicking on ERP screens and doing purchase orders. So enabling that at that level to detect changes tends to be the most sustainable way, but it varies based on the culture and based on the organization and where it's at. So I think as you flip through some of these, you'll see that, I think this one is probably the one we'll spend the most time today on 4 to 5 and what that transition looks like. But assuming that you've got some governance, you've got a home, you've got somebody, we've got the population of processes that exist in the organization. So Scott, to your earlier question, what's a good starting point? Well, oftentimes we don't know what the population of enterprise processes even are. And we don't necessarily know how important those are comparably. So which ones should we map out first? You can use an FMEA tool just on your process maturity. And oftentimes we'll say, yeah, so there's 67 swim lane processes that are the processes by which your organization functions. But there's probably seven or eight mega value chain level processes like procure to pay that encompass maybe 12 or 13 of those. So oftentimes, depending on the organization, let's pick procure to pay. That's really cross-departmental, highly cross-functional, highly transactional, and is often a place where there's lots of opportunity to both automate and surface role issues within the process. And so, one of the starting points is getting the teams together and doing a little ranking, group, nominal group technique, FMEA, and getting the team to collaborate and say, yeah, let's focus on these 12 processes within procure to pay, and let's start there. And when we fix something, let's celebrate it. Let's put it on the company homepage and talk about how we did that and start to replicate that in other areas successfully, to your earlier question. When you look at 4 to 5, though, a lot of organizations are like, yeah, I've got some digital Visio or Lucidchart or what have you process maps, and we've got an ERP and we've got some things that are automated, or maybe we're in the Microsoft stack and we've got Power Automate, and maybe we're dabbling, maybe there's a few things we've built. I think a lot of the 4 to 5 transition is that, especially for transactional processes, there are really nice pockets of processes that are great candidates to begin to automate, to begin to take the human element out of that. And what that does, the end game is really that, the percentage of time the human spends is in insight creation, so that we can make a decision that serves the highest good of the organization as a result of the process, not executing the process. So when you look at, UiPath, Blue Prism, Automation Anywhere, Power Automate, these platforms, really the goal is that those that are doing the processes are able to gain some altitude, look at the performance of the process based on the data points that are created at those steps, and predict failures, mitigate those in advance, help better forecast how the downstream flow is going to be impacted as a result. And that's the why we do this. And a lot of those tools nowadays are no code, simple UI drag and drop frameworks. You don't have to necessarily be a software engineer to pull off automating or connecting some of these transactional processes. So I'm going to pause there again and maybe open it back up, Jim, Scott, on what's top of mind now that we've started to see some of this in action.
Yeah, no, I think this is all good detail, Jared. I know there's some questions popping up in the chat we may want to address as well, but I think this is great. I think one of the things that I'm not sure who's in the audience today, but we're certainly spending a lot of time talking through the what and the how of doing this work. I think it's equally important to be thinking as an audience member today of, articulating the why is this important. And in short, obviously this type of work is going to drive a significant amount of value for the organization, and measuring that value and articulating that value to our leaders and demonstrating that value will only get more support and energy and effort and investment in this type of work. So that was just flowing through my head as I'm listening to you, because there's a tremendous amount of value that organizations can derive from doing this type of work if they can get leadership's attention and energy and support and capital and you name it, resources to dig into this more and do this type of work. It's just a matter of, and I think, and I'll speak for myself and the teams that I've been a part of historically, we probably don't do a very good job of telling the value story alongside of the how and the what story. And we've got to get a lot better at that so we can continue to do the things that you're talking to us about here in terms of the what and the how. So
yeah, thanks, Jim, for that. Go ahead, Scott.
Well, I was just going to say, Jared, that this migration that you're mapping out is, and you've alluded to it in your comments. To me, it all starts with the senior leadership team getting clear on what's possible for the organization. So getting a clear shared vision that they're aligned on. And so at MDS, when we started the operational excellence program, the CEO came to me and said, Scott, the first thing we got to do is we got to get all my direct reports aligned on the same sheet of music in terms of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And because this work that you're talking about here, Jared, requires so much coordination and cooperation and alignment between HR and IT and supply chain and finance. And so, we spend lots of time in workshops in each of those units, getting those units to in other words, getting the finance top team, getting the IT top team to create a shared vision for their functional area, but doing that in the context of the shared vision for the organization, the enterprise itself. Because if you've got an OpEx team or a business process improvement team, and they understand the mechanics of what you're talking here, in other words, they know the roadmap, they know exactly what to do, and you don't have that context, that leadership context, and that alignment, this is going to be impossible to pull off.
Yeah, 100%. I think the positioning of this too is quite important. Oftentimes we see, people are smart, and when they hear RPA and they hear some of these, it screams to them, if we pull this off, am I going to have a job still? And I think you have to confront that head on through really courageous and transparent communications at the leadership level. I mean, our jobs as industrial engineers is to take the work out. And oftentimes organizations that are growing, it's very much, let's move into insight creation, higher value added activities. Let's grow the business.
Yep.
But in other cases, we have to be profitable. We have to cut costs, and this is another way to take some of that out. So positioning that and getting out ahead of that is absolutely critical. You can't not say it. You can't not choose a position on why we're doing this to become more competitive. So that's another dynamic we have to get right, and is often not gotten right. I think great question session gave us here. And I think, Scott, why don't you move forward into, there's a slide called where the industry already is. Yes. And so I think, industry dependency is critical on this. There are some highly transactional systems like banking, insurance, others tend to be higher on this maturity because they're ERP and process mining systems are already in place. So when we talk about where the industry is, we already see organizations like Solanus, for example, and that's one of a number of enterprise process mining, data mining systems out there, where like in tier 1 banks, I know there are, for some value chains, 40 to 50% of those transactions occur autonomously already. So a process is a module, it's a node that has date process, that has metadata associated with that. And that is one of 256 process steps that occurs fully autonomously based on a heuristic that's defined, based on business rules that's defined. And the user gets a report out of how that process is performing and makes recommendations. In some cases, the adaptive nature of the heuristic automatically makes a change to the process. And that's happening now. So in some organizations, they're at a level 6 maturity now, especially in banking and financial transactional systems, just to answer your question. In others that might be a small, mid-market distribution center or manufacturer, they might be at a 1.8 or a 2. And, thus we have to be ready to have strategies and technologies to move them to the next level, and those differ greatly. And I don't necessarily always think that 5 to 6 is more complex than 1 to 2.
Yeah.
Great
Yeah,
question.
that's a good point. That's a good point. One of the attendees asked that question. Are different industries at different stages? And I think the answer is yes. And I think that what's the right level of maturity? I guess the right level is maybe the wrong word, because I think that being a 5 is important for everybody, but a 5 is going to look different depending upon what industry you're in.
That's exactly right.
Sorry to jump in there, but I think related to that, one question that I don't know if our audience is thinking this, but if I were a leader watching this, if I've fallen behind the curve, Jared, and let's say maybe I'm at a 1, or maybe I haven't even started yet, and I start to see how this concept has evolved over time, how easy is it for me to jump in and say, hey, I want to start this, I expect to be at a 3 or a 4 right away, versus it really being a disciplined maturity where, okay, I want to jump in at a 3 or 4, but I really have to start at that 1 level and work my way up?
Yeah, great question. And that's the typical challenge there when maybe you're at a 1.5. And I'll address the question. Great question by Humberto, but is that everybody's flat out. We probably don't have capital. We weren't planning to just hire a 4-person industrial engineering or continuous improvement competency. My operators are busy. I don't even know what Visio is, and I don't know who's capable of doing a flow chart. So how do I get started? I think that's one of the most difficult questions. And so obviously there's lots of mechanics to do that. One, you could hire external. You could work to free it up on somebody's plate. But typically what happens is you don't necessarily have good transparency into the organization's processes, and that creates angst, and it creates a sense of, we don't know where our bottlenecks are, we don't know where our choke points or flow is. So the good thing about that sort of 1 to 2 transition is that the gains tend to be quite significant. Once somebody just gets in a room for a day and gets maybe 5, 6, 7 of your key people in there, and gets even just on butcher block paper, we don't need fancy technologies, just get things down, do some basic value stream analysis. We know this process step has an average cycle time of 3 minutes, but I think where people get caught up is we also want to look at the variance of that individual process step cycle time. So it might be a cycle time of 5 minutes with a standard deviation of 20 minutes. And we know that the cycle time's 5 minutes, but the lead time, the elapsed time is 24 hours, because we got to wait for this product to get through QA release. And so the initial act of getting things on paper of a value train and starting to circle obvious bottlenecks and starting to address those begins to free up more time for that team to do more process improvement work. So it's I guess the opposite of a vicious cycle. It's a wonderful cycle, because as a result of freeing up that time, you start to do it more and copy and paste that into other areas. So I think oftentimes organizations at that level don't have any sense of flow or capacity or bottleneck or choke point management of their enterprise processes. Things just disappear in the plant, and we think it works based on our production schedule, but we don't really know. So I think that's a great point. I think in in technology, transactional banking, insurance, where there are processes that can occur and be automated fairly quickly, it's really ripe for some of these technologies. To Humberto's point, in manufacturing, where you've got a work cell and you're making something and you've maybe got some robotics, or maybe not, maybe you've got some machines that run and go from stage to stage. You may not have the ability to automate some of these processes. If the ROI on a robot isn't there, and we don't have CapEx for it, which is often the case. I do think that at least getting a digital representation of a value stream analysis of our work cells, their average cycle times, number of batch, number of pieces in queue. We've seen that in a number of organizations where just getting that on paper completely differed from our MRP or production system. The other thing is a lot of the times we don't have a machine network of existing machines through a SCADA or PLC network where we have critical data points from those machines. We don't have a lot of insights based on that. And so oftentimes in manufacturing, it's going back to basics and building a machine network, looking at getting sort of a digital twin variant of your current state process, and starting to even do some dynamic simulations, static or discrete or stochastic, to look at flowing more product through the line. Where's our choke point? So I'd say in the manufacturing, it's a slightly different set of technologies and strategies to address that versus highly transactional systems. So I think, and some great questions in the chat. Keep them flowing. We'll keep addressing those one by one. But organizations are already there, and you can see some of these, more tier one journeys. Again, we're technology agnostic. You can do this, with the Microsoft stack using Power Automate. You don't have to necessarily invest in, multi-million-dollar platforms to pull this off. In some cases, you can do this, in Outlook, writing macros. If you want if one of your process steps is somebody sends an email to, parts management, and that's a process step, you can build a simple macro. And so it doesn't have to be complex on the technology side either. And I think that's a paradigm often organizations have. So I think before I move further, I think we've got some case studies, and we'll focus more maybe on what technologies, what are some additional strategies to employ. But Scott, Jim, before we do that, is there anything, any questions or any leading questions that you have?
Well, let's finish this up, Jared. We got about 7 minutes here, so let's finish this up, and then I got some things I want to close out with.
And great. So and Ben made a really good chat about sort of resource schedule, variance, capacity, and workflow embedded into our workflows around sort of process mining and what type of measurements we need at the process level. I mean, that's spot on. That's what we're looking for on this. And it can come in a variety of ways. If you go back just one slide, Scott. So some of the technologies, again, there's many more than this list. But if you want to get inspired, when you go to 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 or 3 to 4, 4 to 5, et cetera, there are some technologies that can enable you to do those, whether they're digital whiteboards, digital process mapping. You can have, two-dimensional Visio process maps. You can start to enable shape data macros. You can start to connect that into Microsoft Flow and Power Automate and take those and make them live. It's literally a live process. It's not static. You can move that and integrate UiPath and start to automate some of those based on business rules. And you can move into, Solanus and other organizations have practices RSM as well, where they're doing fully autonomous business process management for a particular set of business processes that occur without human intervention. So the range is fairly high, and we're not preaching any particular technology. You have to choose what's best for your organization and where you're at on the maturity curve here. So as we move into maybe some of the other slides, we'll go through, one of the things, see a really big complex map, and you're not designed to read all of those there on the left-hand side, but just getting things on paper. We often build a flow chart of a static process, maybe a swim lane of who does what, but do we ever go up a level and actually show the organization's interdepartmental processes in one big map? So in this case, we often click sort of a digital twin, a digital enterprise roadmap or process map, and you can zoom into the swim lane or detailed level, but you can also zoom out and see who's doing what and how long does that take and what's the choke point and et cetera. So I think that's a good strategy to at least start with if you don't have that. So this is a slice of that. So imagine zooming into 1 or 2 of those boxes. This is a swim lane with maybe 30 processes. And I think, here's an example where the team said, yeah, we might have five or six in green here, 5 or 6 of these that are great candidates for automation. So sometimes it's doing some scoping exercises where we look at the 25 steps and say, yeah, well, you know what? These are 5 areas where we can take the human out of it and build some scripts to automatically send this email or send this transaction from start to finish. And that's what we do here in the case of looking at robotic processing automation candidates. And sometimes it's as simple here as, whether it's the pre-authorization deposit and void check completion as an input to get banking information. So sometimes it's done via a PDF that comes in and somebody manually types it in, or instead of it's coming in electronically through EDI and moving through and extracting automatically being put into your financial ERP system. So sometimes it's not, rocket science on this. It's finding those good candidates, looking at the business case, seeing how many hours it'll save, and taking the manual entries out of it. So anytime you've got transactional systems where there's lots of manual entry, that's a great area that's ripe for automation. So I think you can keep going a couple slides and see. So in this case here, this is if you go back one, this is the actual flow in Power Automate of, hey, we've got an idea, we've got a PDF, somebody receives that, then they manually key it in. Well, in this case, we're going to use some software that automatically extracts that data and Power Automate from it being received to somebody's mailbox to it being inputted automatically all the way down the line. These are the 7 steps now that happen automatically without human intervention. And a new file is created, and we know that that process was successful, completed on time. And so it's just as simple as that in many cases, where you can take something that maybe took somebody 15 hours a week, and now it's maybe 30 minutes and it's done automatically. And I think the other piece, and I think we'll close with this and maybe address either some last minute questions or wrap up, but as you start to grow this competency, those are point solutions and they're easy to get excited about, but eventually you're going to need to think about your system architecture. This is data intensive, and if you don't have that thought through from the beginning, or at least a migration strategy, by doing all of this, what this naturally means is you need layers of APIs and layers of middleware that can begin to connect disparate systems together, so that when you're process mining, it's typically coming from multiple systems. So how do you interact and build those together and so this is just one product, Solanas in this case, building that middleware layer, that engine that can establish metadata of your process characteristics is quite critical. So as you begin to move into 5.0, the technology dimension does get a little more complex and has to be thought through in detail. And when you look at complex systems like the one that was just shown, you can see that interactions can be complex between these nodes. And you start to see that, hey, now we're not necessarily looking at the output of KPI. We're actually looking at measuring and managing process characteristics. And when you start doing that, you're starting to get into pretty mature conversations about measuring the efficacy of your processes. So I'll pause there, I think, and turn it back over to you, Scott. I know we threw a lot at you, but I think there's some really great and easy strategies for wherever you're at in the maturity to take some time out of your organization and reinvest it into other things to be more competitive.
Yeah, that's good, Jared. I think you've piqued the interest. You've piqued some people's curiosity about how the migration from 3 to 4 to 4 to 5 and 5 to 6 might look. So that's exactly what I think we wanted to do: give people some examples and a little bit of a taste of what that looks and feels like. Let's run through real quickly some of the key points in summary. So I think we kicked off by saying that the 20s. Somebody said the 20s are going to be a period of a black swan decade. We talked about the pandemic being a black swan, and all of a sudden we got a flock of black swans on the horizon. And I think there's some truth to that. I think we're at a tipping point relative to productivity and quality improvement. And there's a lot of paradigms around how to do B, and I'm using that term B, build the business, improve what we do and how we do it. There are paradigms around how to do B better and faster. And I think that insightful leadership. So to Jared's point, if you don't have the leadership aligned, if you don't have the leadership challenging their paradigms, the way they think about investing in B and how you do B in an organization, then it's going to be a pretty tough row to hoe. So I think 2023 is going to put a lot of pressure on cutting non-operations related costs. We talked about that. I think BPI programs are going to come under intense pressure. In some cases, organizations will cut budgets of those, and so they're going to have to do more with less. So I think that, Jared, the challenge is for, when I was at MDS, I thought I was pretty capable of designing and developing an OpEx program, but I still went out and spent $1 million getting people to come in and help me do what we had to do, because I thought they could accelerate. I thought somebody that does it for a living, that's done 20 of them, was going to be better than me having done it the first or second time. So I think that that's the kind of paradigm that organizations are going to have to face and challenge themselves with in their 20s, is how do we get faster and better at B? And a lot of times it's a situation where we don't know what we don't know, right? And the other interesting thing, Jared, and Jim, about business process improvement, we've really got to do it. We've got to do it in the positioning domain area. So there's 3 ways that organizations can grow enterprise value. We grow value because we position ourselves in the marketplace better. We exchange value, we optimize the exchange of value with our suppliers and with our employees and with our customers. And then we've got OpEx. And so traditionally, VPI and industrial engineers tended to focus on the one on the right, but we've got to expand all these business processes. They cut across all 3 ways to grow enterprise value, which really means that the domain is going to be much, much bigger in the 20s than it has been in the past. So I'm going to skip through these because we're running out of time here, but I just want to let the audience know that we've got these sort of summary key points from today that you can read through. I guess my last point would be integrated systems engineering is going to be central to doing the work that Jared is talking about. I think ISE is a foundational, I think a degree in ISE is a foundation, Jared, to be good at, what you're talking about doing. I can't imagine, because we're integrated systems engineers, right?
Yeah, I'm not going to debate you on that one, and I might be a little biased, but we're engineered from our curriculum and co-ops and all the experiences we get to do this, because it's a blend of the human element of the process and system element, as well as the technology enablement component more and more. Now, obviously, there's lots of other folks that can do this and play a part, but I think we've got that sweet spot of concentric circles of skills to enable us to do this really well.
Jim, closing thoughts on our summary points?
Yeah, no, I think this has been great, Scott and Jared. Thanks for walking us through this detail. I guess the piece I would leave the audience with is, if your leader is not thinking about this or aware of this, I think it's pivotal and it's critical for you to help build the case of how this type of work really drives value in the organization. And it's not administrative work. To Scott's last point, it drives value at every dimension or aspect of delivering our products across the board. And therefore, it really warrants our attention and our focus and our energy. So we've got to get really good at measuring that value, showing that value, talking that value, and continuing to get energy and investment and resource to continue this work, because it's pivotal. And in today's marketplace, inaction on this type of work will become much more costly than taking proactive action to put these things in place. So very important.
Yeah, 100%. So I mentioned that we provide contact information. This is how you can get a hold of Jared and Jim. If you want to get a hold of James Swisher is the Director for Continuing Ed and Program Development for IISE. If you have any questions about IISE or how IISC could serve your organization, feel free to reach out to him. And if you got any ideas on great webinars, if you're a member of IISC and you'd like to talk with me about doing a webinar, feel free to reach out to me for that. This is Farouk is going to once again give you the links to use, but these are the links that you can use to get access to the recording. And then if you'd like to see a blog version of this, a written blog, and a YouTube version of this, you can go to the other two links that Farouk has provided. Just ahead, we've got we're going to switch gears a little bit. On the 21st, we've got PV Industries is going to talk to us about huddles, how they've used huddles in their OpEx program. And then on the 9th of November, we've got someone from IBM going to talk to us about Ed Biddle from IBM UK will be talking with us about Data Sciences 101 and 201. And then in December, Jared will be back with me and we'll be talking about some of the most common and highest priority failure modes in OpEx programs and how you can address those more effectively and efficiently. So there's a survey. Last thing, there's a survey. James and I would appreciate your feedback. So if you take time to let us know how we did, we'd appreciate that. And in closing, Jared, Jim, thanks very much for taking time from busy schedules to do this for us and share your wisdom and your knowledge with our members and customers of IISC. Thank you.
Great topics. Thanks to you, Scott.
Everybody stay safe and stay healthy. See you next time.